Welcome to the Blockchain Startup Show with Harrison Wright, a podcast dedicated to dauntless blockchain leaders building our new decentralized future. You'll hear stories, successes, trials, and tribulations as we channel into the lives of high-performing leaders in crypto and Web3. Whether you're currently a Web3 founder or leader, or you one day aspire to be, you'll gain crucial knowledge and insights to accelerate your learning curve, handle this industry's greatest challenges, and make the impact you've always dreamed of.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Blockchain Startup Show. This is your host, Harrison Wright. I'm here today with Tom Phipps, who is currently Senior Marketing and Community Manager for Blockchain. In a previous life, though, Tom was head of the Web3 stream for Entrepreneur First, where he built out from scratch and then managed their entire Web3 startup program. And Tom has so many great insights from having worked with dozens of Web3 founders, helping them to really navigate those crucial first 6 months of the startup journey. And Tom, welcome. That's what I'm really excited to talk to you about today. I'm sure there are always tangents here, but I think you have some really amazing things to share here, which would be really useful to a lot of founders.
Yeah, cheers, Harrison. Excited to be here, and hopefully there's a few stories or two we can dive into and chat about.
Definitely. But before we get into that, and that is going to be the real meat and bones here, but I'd love, for the benefit of the audience, if we could hear just a little bit about your journey. How did you get into entrepreneurship and Web3?
Yeah, sure thing. Well, it all started back at university. Luckily, it's a great environment for looking at different opportunities. I think quite early on, back in law school, I decided I didn't really want to become a lawyer. So used that freedom and that time to explore different opportunities. I actually enjoyed reading. So I was doing a load of reading outside of the legal sort of course, and stumbled across blockchain. There was this book by Lawrence Lessig called Code 2.0. And it was a fantastic read about internet technology and regulation. And that really caught my imagination and went down the rabbit hole from there, found out about immutability, and then pretty much decided for the next several years, I just wanted to explore this further. So university being a great environment for exploring different academic concepts and notions, and having that free time as well was really useful. So I stayed at university for 7 years, probably spent more time looking into crypto, blockchain, and trying to start up as well on the side, probably more so than I was actually studying, but it was worth it in the end. So came out the other side, dropping out of my PhD in my final year actually to take on this role at Entrepreneur First to head up their Web3 program.
Yeah. How did that came about? Did they come knocking on your door? You don't need to be doing that PhD. Come and work with us.
Yeah. So alongside the PhD, I was also working for a venture capital fund, Creator Fund. They're a fantastic fund that invests in university research spinouts. So whilst I was working there, I was operating as their sort of crypto analyst, given my deep interest and I guess experience at the time in the crypto blockchain field. I think they'd seen I'd been working, looking at starting up myself and working with startups for the past couple of years in that role. And they actually tried to get me to join as a founder for, there was a couple of knocks on the door, so to speak, in terms of looking at me to join, to do that. It was actually later on that this opportunity came along that they were building out this Web3 program. And I got the opportunity to join to sort of lead the direction of that.
Spot on. Am I right in saying I don't have any notes on this. I just have a vague memory that at one point we talked about that you've come to the conclusion that actually maybe the best thing for you to do is not to be a founder, but to be supportive to founders.
Yeah.
Do I remember that rightly?
Yeah. So, I mean, during my university years, I tried starting up, did it for a couple of years with a good friend of mine. It was a fantastic learning experience. But following that, I did stay close to the sort of startup entrepreneurial ecosystem, both at university and then with Creator Fund. And it's something that I actually really, really enjoyed. I find it fascinating speaking to all these young, innovative founders that are working on all these super, amazing ideas. And to be able to be a part of that process, help them through some of those sort of early overcoming those early obstacles, and I guess just seeing them grow on that journey as well, I found really, really rewarding. And so obviously joining Entrepreneur First seemed like a really good opportunity to further that. And yeah, whilst I might not be deep in the startup ecosystem right now with my current role, there's still quite a few startups that I speak to on a regular basis just to support them along the way. And I guess, I stay in touch via other networks. So helping Fabric Ventures with a lot of the stuff they do around Web3 startups.
I think there's an important ecological niche here. It's like if you look at sports, the coach, the world leading coach is not the guy who was the world's best player. The coach is a different skill set entirely.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. Having had some experience starting up is always useful, but also then just being in these ecosystems. I mean, I actually learned loads from the startups along the way as well, right? So it's not just sort of one way. You're coaching them, but at the same time, they're often enlightening you on a number of different topics, which you can then leverage that moving forward as well to support even more startups. So, yeah, I mean, I think having these really strong ecosystems where there is that sort of open community and that back and forth learning is super valuable, and it's something that I've really enjoyed being a part of so far.
Yeah, I can imagine, and I have to say, I think people often don't give enough credit to how intimidating and potentially lonely the job of being a founder can be. Especially, imagine if you, I mean, probably there's someone listening to this who can resonate with this, but imagine you've never built a company before, but you're doing so now. You've got to figure out all these things from scratch. Someone then hands you millions of dollars, and then suddenly you're responsible for all this money, all these people. It's huge. Not everyone can do it, but I think having that support ecosystem is really beneficial for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, you need that network behind you. It seems easy from an outsider's perspective, seeing these startups take on this money and then expecting them to go places with it. But the reality of it is that you need your co-founder, these other people in the ecosystem to really help you move things forward, because it's definitely not. It's very rare for this to be an endeavor that one person can take on their own, just because, as you mentioned, there's just so many challenges that come down the line.
Definitely. And when you're venture backed, there's, well, where am I going with this? If you bootstrap a company, you kind of figure it out as you go, and then maybe you learn some lessons, and eventually you make it a success, or you try again next time. But when you're venture backed, a lot of people's money and careers on the line there.
Yeah, it's a big responsibility to take on, and yeah, for many people, especially first time founders, they've never been put in that situation before where they've got to deal with multiple stakeholders, having that accountability, and being, I guess, good money managers. Right at the end of the day, that's what makes or breaks the startup. It's how well can you manage that runway? The money you've got is how long your startup's technically living for that foreseeable future. You want to try and make the most of it, manage it as effectively as possible, so that you can get to that next funding round and raise again. Just because, yeah, it's very rare for it to be a one and done sort of thing in terms of raising capital.
Absolutely. How many founders would you say you worked with closely in your time on Entrepreneur First?
Yeah, so it was dozens of Web3 founders. I think the first cohort we started with was about 40 odd to begin with. And then obviously throughout the process, that number reduces as founders either decide it's not the right program for them, as I think, EF is quite an intense process. But also at the same time, we do have that sort of halfway measure where EF as a fund decides which teams they want to back further and which teams, unfortunately, don't meet the bar at that stage.
Mm-hmm. So, what I'd really love to get into here, and hey, we could just talk about founders and things all day, and it's awesome. It will never get boring to me, but I always want to find with this show an actionable set of things that someone can actually walk away and use. So, I'd love to hear your insights on what you've seen about the recipe for success with founders, or where things have gone not so right. What do you think could be maybe the first most interesting topic there we could dive into?
Yeah, sure thing. So again, reflecting on my time at EF, I think one of the things we really drill into founders from day dot is very much focus on customer development first and foremost. So really make sure you're building something that is going to be used, people want to use, and that you're not building for the sake of building and hoping that people are just going to turn up and use your product or service once you finish it. I think, quite honestly, that's probably the number one killer of startups, is building something that has no purpose or use case. It, it's easy to fall into that trap as well, because I can imagine as a super bright, talented founder, you may think you have this world changing idea and you get so obsessed about that you want to go and sort of like push it through and see it to completion. But the reality of it is, it's probably not unique. Someone's probably thought of that before. And the only way you're going to find that out is by testing, right? So it's going out into the community, finding your sort of target customer and really having those open and honest conversations with them where you can really get to grips with the crux of the problem, because it may become clear quite quickly that this isn't a problem that you thought, and it's better to find out sooner rather than later.
Yeah, that, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but you're just reminding me of lately. I've had probably 5 or 6 people in the past few months just randomly approach me wanting feedback on their new tech disrupting the recruitment industry tool, which invariably has something to do with using AI to screen resumes at scale. And every time they're so convinced that they've landed on something brilliant and they want to get some feedback on it. And I point out to them, this is not solving the problem that actually exists, because number one, the bottleneck is not number of resumes to screen. The bottleneck is getting the attention of the right people to hire in the first place. And no AI is going to help you do that. And number two, there was another one who sort of combined this with hey, let's have them sit through a one-way video interview. No one was self-respecting of their time is going to sit through a one-way video interview, no matter how efficient that is for the people that are hiring. But it's fascinating, because I hear the same pitch over and over again. Every time they're absolutely convinced they've got something brilliant. But one of the times I was actually, usually they kind of don't necessarily listen to the feedback that much, but one time, I never thought of it that way. Thanks. That's really, let me go back and think about this again. And that's, I'm guessing that's the reaction that you want.
Yeah. And I've been there as well, right? Working for VCs, it's one of the most common things you'll experience is seeing something pitched over and over again. And quite honestly, the issue there is the founder's not done their due diligence beforehand. They've not had those productive conversations. But you're right, it is refreshing when you do have those conversations, and it does open your eyes to new perspectives. And this is what you really want to see founders doing, is having those conversations and having those moments themselves where they realize, we shouldn't be focusing on this. From the conversation we've just had, we've seen that the customer is really concerned about this process or whatever it may be. So it is this, you just got to be humble and take the feedback and be open-minded that what you start with is not necessarily what you're going to finish up with. And I think that's the real sort of distinguishing factor as to whether a startup's going to be successful or not. And yeah, it's an important character trait you want to see in founders.
So Tom, something I'm really curious about here is, in all the dozens of teams you worked with at Entrepreneur First, what percentage of the time would you say that the product or value proposition that they ended up with was substantially different from what they started with?
Yes, I think it's probably 90% of the time. If they learned from the EF team throughout the journey, through all the advisors, we wanted to see that sort of process of ideation in a way where they would go away, have those sort of iterative feedback cycles, speaking to the customers, learning, improving. And I think if you do that in the right way, generally you will see the company, the product, the service evolve over time. It's probably in the rare occasion you do see 1 or 2 companies that go through that process, and actually the idea they start with is actually relatively similar to what they end up with. But that's probably the minority of cases, quite honestly.
That's really interesting. I tell you something else, another little bit of a tangent, something that I probably in some respects similar to your work with Entrepreneur First. One of the things I really enjoy about my line of work is you get such an inside view over so many iterations of seeing patterns of which organizations succeed, which ones don't, and why, and the inflection points that make them grow or shrink, and so on. And there's a definite trend that I've noticed, which I don't see talked about much in venture circles, is that companies with too much money often screw this up because they end up just throwing money at things until they run out of money, or sometimes never run out of money, instead of actually solving the problem. And I'm not going to name names, but there are some large, well-established organizations in crypto that have been around, say, may have raised billions in ICO money back when that was a thing, or that just they have so much money from tokens and so on. So these people still employ hundreds of people, but I'm not actually sure what any of them do. Nothing useful ever comes out of these. It just feels like a jobs program at this point.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen the article that's been going around recently about zombie crypto companies. Yeah, it's been looking at.
No, I haven't.
Okay, so there's an article going around at the minute. I'll try and find the link for you afterwards, but it's saying just that, right? There's so many. It could be layer ones, for example, that have raised X amount of money. It's in the millions, potentially billions, right? And they're not really offering anything new to the ecosystem. They're just, I guess, doing their thing, but nothing innovative or nothing game changing is really coming out of these ecosystems now. It feels pretty stagnant, if we can use that word. It's frustrating to see, but I think that's also the trap, right? Where you do raise all that money in the early days, and you've never had to manage that scale of capital before, and you just don't know what to do with it. And I think we've seen that with these teams where they make their money, unfortunately, don't know how to manage it properly, and I guess they just keep doing the same old, without really taking pause to think, okay, hang on, what should we actually be doing? Clearly, this isn't working. We're not moving things forward. Maybe we should consider a new direction. I think a good example of this is potentially, if we can name a couple of examples, OpenSea. They were founded back in 2017. They were pretty much ahead of their time as a marketplace for NFTs. They saw the potential there to create this sort of platform for non-fungible tokens where they could be exchanged, and they timed it well. The NFT craze of 2021 saw them, raking it in, and unfortunately, I think they probably got a bit complacent and had this issue where they've raised loads of money. It seems all positive. They've got a really strong revenue stream, but look at it 2 or 3 years later, and quite honestly, it's a totally different picture. They didn't take that time to think, okay, how should we actually use this as investment to, innovate, push forward, potentially offer new products. And we've seen all these different incumbents enter the market and just take market share from them left, right, and center, to the point where I think back in 2022, they were doing about 90% of NFT trading volume. I think if we look at them today, a couple of years on, I think it's less than 20%, maybe less than 15% of volume now, which is pretty staggering considering the sheer dominance they had, and the head start as well.
That's an incredible stat. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, it's scary. Imagine running that company and things changing so quickly. But I think that's one of those things where you just can't afford to be complacent, particularly in crypto where things move so fast. You've just got to be open-minded and ready to pivot and adapt as the market evolves, because, hey, it's a nascent market. It's not going to move slowly. Things are going to change. There's going to be all these new players. You've seen the level of innovation taking place. You can't afford to take your time or be static and complacent.
It's really interesting if you look at crypto versus other industries. If you look at the general progression of technology, there's been a trend for shorter and shorter feedback cycles. So something I talk about a lot is the industrial to information age transition. So if you look at an industrial age company, pretty much anything that existed before the internet, companies would stay dominant for decades or maybe even centuries. I might be stretching it with centuries, but no, not necessarily. But when are we ever going to see a GE of crypto? I doubt it. Like your OpenSea example, that's the entire cycle of IBM going from nothing to dominating everything to a sort of relegated to the minor leagues company. But that took probably nearly a century. I'm not sure exactly, but with OpenSea, it took 3 years?
Yeah, scary. But then, you look at other companies that have, I guess, had that mindset of constantly learning, iterating, and improving. I think Coinbase is probably the prime example for that, right? So they started in 2012. Uh, they started as a simple crypto exchange, so buying, selling, swapping crypto assets. Pretty simple. You look at them today, pretty much a decade on, and they've got a fully fledged, like, diversified product suite. Whether it's serving institutional clients now, particularly on the custody side with the ETFs, whether it's actually spinning up their own layer two base. It's pretty incredible how far they've come from what was just a simple crypto exchange. I mean, I remember in the early days using them, I think probably back 2015, 2016, and it was really primitive. There's pretty much only three things you could do. There's probably like Bitcoin, Litecoin, and Ethereum when it came online, and all we could do was buy, sell, swap them, and that was it. But I guess they've seen the opportunity in this market. They've seen that it's worth spending the time and investment to actually, do the research and look to improve and iterate on what you already have. And particularly, I think Base is a great example of that, because if you look at the revenue now that's generating through its sequences, I think I can't remember this specific figure, but it's in the millions, tens of millions now in terms of revenue that it's generating for Coinbase. And yeah, it's incredible to see them constantly adding to, I guess, their different revenue streams and all that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, something really. This is going to sound really random. I don't know if you've seen this, but I remember seeing it was on Twitter somewhere. Someone dug up that Brian Armstrong back in the day was an old school internet marketer.
Oh,
Back
really?
when info products were the big thing.
Yeah.
I think we're going back 20 years or something like that. And I thought that was really interesting because I might just be trying to draw connections from things that are not connected, but it seems to me like that would be great training in how to in product market fit, essentially.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if you're to look at all the crypto companies out there right now, Coinbase definitely nails product market fit. They have, I think they've always stayed close to their customers, had that close feedback cycle, and clearly it's paying off.
Definitely right. Where have you seen? We can talk. We can look at this in the context of those first 6 months when you worked in that context, or just other teams that you've seen or experienced. Where have you seen people get this wrong?
Maybe one example could be, again, looking at people just creating NFTs for the sake NFT marketplaces for the sake of NFT marketplaces now. Yeah. So OpenSea clearly had that first mover advantage. They did well. It was worth it back then for them to go down that route. Unfortunately, it didn't work out as probably they had hoped, given with the rise of Blur and some of these other marketplaces. But back then, yeah, fair play. Probably worth spending your time doing. It's frustrating nowadays when you just see people doing the same thing over and over again. And I think it is just that, oh, we can take so and so's idea and just do it again, but for this chain or that chain. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to find product market fit, right? Because you've got to consider the ecosystem you're building in, the different users within that ecosystem. And, particularly in crypto where there's all these different nuances as well, it's really hard to necessarily take something from like the EVM ecosystem and throw it into one of these newer chains. And I think it's easy to be complacent on that front as well, where you can try and borrow ideas. Look, there'll still be people that do it, but to really get that product market fit, I think first of all you've got to go back to starting with, okay, who's the customer, what problem we're actually solving here, and how we actually going to get to that end goal of curing it.
Yeah, it makes me think of something in the software industry, and I think go to market in crypto can be somewhat different because a lot of the time we're not selling things which have revenue yet.
Yeah.
But something that really common mistake that software founders make is, hey, we've got our software developed. Let's go build a sales team, and then they just add salespeople. And the cost of building an outbound sales organization these days is absolutely staggering.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of them are not profitable. But they think, oh, we'll add bodies to this and we'll sell more. And invariably, a lot of the time, it just collapses. And actually, from what I've seen, the only time, maybe some edge cases here or there, but the only time adding salespeople to the process helps is when the founder has already got to a certain level, probably about $500,000 in revenue a year, doing the sales themselves, proven that it works, and then they add people to a system which already exists. But just throwing bodies at things doesn't work. I'm sure there are many cases in crypto where you make an allegory of that.
An example could be maybe not sales folks, but maybe looking at these other L1s, right, where they've raised all that money, they've created this chain, and they just throw money at developers without really thinking, what these people are going to do within the ecosystem and how that's actually going to translate to people actually joining the ecosystem. So, I mean, I think with every layer one, the primary goal is to generate or, attract a load of liquidity, right? Once you have liquidity within the ecosystem, it becomes quite an attractive proposition to maybe look to build out some of these different products, whether it's DeFi or in one of these other verticals. And yeah, I think maybe that's an analogy here. So whether it's, it's not sales people necessarily, but it's just adding people to an ecosystem, expecting that to be the game changer. Instead, what they should be doing is thinking about, okay, well, what are our competitors doing, right? What's the state of play across the broader crypto space? Why do we need another L1 that does exactly the same thing as one of these other ones? And I think I don't know if it's maybe a slight arrogance of some founders where they think, well, ours is going to be better. We don't need to worry about what everyone else is doing. I think you've got to have that. You've got to have some level of confidence when you're a startup founder. You've got to back yourself, right? Because in the early days, no one else is going to. But yeah, I think the danger is often where people just get so caught up in their own hype, they don't actually consider, what the status quo actually is and what they need to be doing to actually meaningfully move their projects along. Because as I was saying, you've got dozens of these L1 protocols now. They all basically do the same thing. And I'm sure if you were to ask all the founders, they'd say, oh no, but we do this better. Or quite honestly, if they did that better, then surely we'd be seeing the evidence of it in terms of traction, adoption, that sort of thing. So I think founders need to be smart with, where do they actually allocate their resource, and is it meaningful? Because most of the time it'd just be adding developers to an ecosystem for the sake of it. But there's no point building there if you're not going to have any users or customers there to try it out, right?
You remind me of something. About a year ago, it might have been a little more now. I got an inbound inquiry from someone from a nascent L1, which is, let's say, started appearing on the space, not very successfully, I think. But at the time, we were on Zoom and he was pacing around his Dubai penthouse or whatever on his phone, walking up and down, and he was saying things like, we're going to need 8 blockchain developers and 5 blockchain marketers. Okay, what does that mean? Literally just meaningless. Just what is a blockchain marketer? What are they doing? What does that mean? You couldn't answer any of these questions, and it was just one of the most bizarre experiences of my life. But these guys have gone on to raise a lot of money somehow.
Yeah, the proof of being the pudding. I think give it a few more years, we could probably assess whether it's the right thing to do or not. I mean, personally, yeah, you can have as many marketers as you want, right? But ultimately, it'll come down to product and the experience, and whether people want to use it or not. So you can dress it up, sell it however you want, but you can't change the fundamental experience of using that. And I think we've seen that with these different ecosystems that have tried to maybe make their proposition look more attractive. But when it comes to actually, testing it out, seeing how it actually works, well, if it's still painful, if it doesn't really solve any problems, then I don't really care how fancy you make it look. I'm not going to use it again just because there's better alternatives in the market.
You have to wonder if, this thing about everyone wanting to build a new layer one, and there being, any ecosystem is fundamentally a network effects play, and with any network effects play, the value all tends to flow to the top. So most of these L1s are not going to be around in the long term. You have to wonder, is that a symptom of founders building the thing that they want to build rather than what the market actually needs? Because, hey, who wouldn't want to be in charge for a successful L1? All the money and value that flows to that, that's great. But is it what the market needs?
Yeah, I think there's that sort of prestige associated with being the founder of the latest and greatest L1. You look at how, Vitalik's treated across the crypto space, really well respected. I mean, I think probably a lot of that is because he seems like a genuinely decent person, and obviously a very clever guy to have been one of the first innovators in terms of creating these sort of smart contract platforms. And I think you probably have a number of ambitious people that want to sort of follow in his footsteps and achieve the same sort of thing, but probably do it better. But I think, on the other side of the coin here is that there's probably other influences on that decision, particularly, I think, if you look at VCs as well. I think they could be, obviously, they're fantastic for helping projects get off the ground, but at the same time, you've got to be somewhat cynical as to whose interests are they actually serving here, and whether this is the right thing for you as a founder to be doing, because quite often their responsibility is to their investors, their LPs. And I mean, I think there's always been that sort of difficult tension in terms of what a founder wants to do and what the VC wants the founder to do. So it's a difficult space to navigate as a founder. But yeah, on the L1 example, I think people just need to take a step back and really assess whether we need another one, for example, just because we've got dozens now, and I don't think we've seen any meaningful sort of step change since Ethereum. Potentially Solana is starting to iron out the kinks, and potentially, I mean, it was meant, Solana was used as the example in the Stripe update. What was it, yesterday, the day before, announcing crypto payments? So play to them, but all of these other L1s are sort of fallen by the wayside, zombified. It's not really adding anything to the broader crypto ecosystem, where all those developers that actually work on those projects could actually probably be doing more meaningful, impactful work if they actually decided to go and start their own thing and look to contribute potentially in other ways.
Very much so. Have you ever read the Blue Ocean Strategy?
I do have that book. I've not read it yet, so need to get on that.
Are you familiar with the thesis of it?
Generally, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those books where you kind of don't need to read it to understand the concept. I mean, reading it is great, but you'll get 80% of the value just from understanding the headline. But to me, that's such a major factor. If you're listening to this and you're not familiar with this, the red ocean strategies, the sharks, there's blood in the water, you're competing with everybody else. So hey, we're yet another L2 to add to the 50 other L2s that are doing the same thing right now, versus creating a new category, doing something. It doesn't even have to be creating something that didn't exist before. It can just be approaching it in such a way that it makes a competition irrelevant. So, I mean, a classic case of that would be Airbnb when Airbnb was new, or Uber. But I think that is a useful framework to think about when starting any kind of business.
Yeah, for sure. And I think potentially, just because it's such a nascent market right now, everyone's looking to get that foothold and be the one that is the dominant force. And hopefully, as this matures, we see this sort of evolve for the better, where we don't have people just copy and paste in projects left, right, and center, and they are looking to sort of take that initiative and go elsewhere, take other approaches, which is net positive to everyone, because right now it's definitely not the case where you have developers pretty much wasting their time just because, if we're being honest, a load of these projects will fall by the wayside. They're not necessarily going to go on to live to see the next cycle, so to speak. But I think it's a great framework to start with.
Spot on. So something else I'm really curious to talk to you about is, intuitively, it's useful to know, hey, let's not just build what we want to build. We have to go through this process of validation to understand that this is actually going to be successful in the market. But it's one thing to know that, and it's another thing to know how to do it. So from your experience, what does that validation process look like? How do you actually execute that?
Yeah, sure thing. So I think the most important starting point is the founder themselves, right? So what are their skill sets, experiences, which allows them to form potentially a unique insight on the world, which other people don't have, because that gives you a great starting point. It gives you an advantage where you've spotted an opportunity, and you want to explore that further. So I think the first thing you've got to do is once you have that firmly in your mind, you need to really decide, okay, what hypothesis or hypotheses are we testing here? I've got this idea, I've got this notion which I've spoken to so-and-so, and I've stumbled across this problem, but how do we actually unpack that? And so what you need to do is go away and really think about, okay, what questions do I need to be asking? What do I need to be testing? And more importantly, who do I need to be speaking to really, I guess, dive deeper into that problem? And so as a founder, 90% of your time in the early days should be purely speaking to people who you think are the, target customer, user, etc., and just trying to get as much feedback from them as possible. So yeah, founders often skip this step just because they get too excited by the idea, which is very tempting. But if you want to do this right, you've really got to get to the crux of the problem, be all over it, and truly understand, okay, have we tested all the assumptions we need to before actually moving on to thinking about, okay, what does the idea look like in terms of product, service, etc.?
That makes sense. It reminds me of, I don't think you're seeing this as much in traditional like venture scale businesses yet, but I think it's only a matter of time. But something that we take things like social media, Twitter, etc. for granted now. It's just part of the landscape, but it's radically new and novel if you put it into the grander context of things. If you look at the more solopreneur lifestyle business kind of founders, there's a big ecosystem now of people who build an audience, and they have an audience, and then they create things for their audience that exists. So they've kind of done that validation thing, because their intention was not necessarily to build a business initially. They built an audience, and I can build a business now. And then those tend to work quite seamlessly because it's a natural fulfilling of the demand that's been created.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, again, looking at like successful crypto companies, a lot of the time it starts as a community before it even becomes an idea for a company or business. I mean, even looking at Bitcoin as a classic example of this, Bitcoin really only came about through the fact that there was these early days sort of like cryptography forums where people would discuss these different ideas for sort of e-money, e-cash, that sort of thing. And it is through having those conversations, testing out these different ideas, that I think you can stumble across these things which you may not have originally thought of. And yeah, particularly when we're talking about validation, validating an idea is not a static thing. It's something that should constantly be happening throughout a product, a company's life cycle. So, for example, at blockchain.com, one of the things we're looking at implementing within our app right now is having this sort of gamified feedback section where we can basically just use quizzes and polls, which are quite engaging, to learn a lot about our customers, and in particular how we can serve them better moving forwards as well. So I think this is something that every company needs to be doing at every stage of their journey, but it's even more critical in those early days, just to make sure that, before you even set off down a particular track, you're going down the right one and you shouldn't be looking elsewhere.
Yep, I think that's exactly right. And I don't want to get off too much on a tangent here, as we have a habit of, but you could use Apple as a great example of how they used to do this well, and now not so much.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you look at all good tech companies, they've probably baked this into their development cycle in some way. And it's probably the reason they are where they are today, is because they've just constantly been learning and iterating and constantly just testing these different hypotheses. Sometimes, things don't work, and that's fine, as long as you learn something from that and move forward in a way where, you are continuing to go in the right direction.
Definitely. One thing that is very unique to crypto compared to other industries is the whole concept of cycles. I mean, I've been running a business for pretty much one whole cycle now, and what a roller coaster. And I think one of the critical skills, both for just working in crypto, but definitely running a business in crypto, is how to manage those cycles. I mean, even talking about Coinbase, do you remember? Was it in 2021 or 2022? They made this loud proclamation that we're going to be hiring 7,000 people in the next year, and I think they got about 1,000 people through that. And then the bear market hit, which you would think should have been obvious that would come because it's pretty predictable. And then I think they pretty much laid off everyone that they just hired, and they were back to where they were before. So even people that are even organizations that was well run as Coinbase can get this wrong. maybe that's my assumption. Maybe they didn't actually do anything wrong. Maybe that was the right thing to do. But it's extremely challenging.
Yeah, it is the cyclical nature. It's a tough one because I think everyone who's been in the industry for a while knows that that's the nature of the beast and that's how things work. But at the same time, being able to predict that and accurately forecast how it's going to play out each cycle, it's anyone's guess really. It's a difficult thing to deal with. And, hopefully moving forwards, we see less of this as markets mature. And, I think we'll get to the point where, crypto is pretty much there 24/7. It's not going to be this sort of cyclical. It's hot 1 minute and then not the next. But yeah, I think builders, startup founders, they need to keep this in mind. How are you going to navigate the bull market? How are you going to navigate, when things get a bit tougher during the bear? And the best founders are the ones that, spend the time planning for each of these scenarios. I think in the bull market, you can think you're a genius and you've stumbled across product market fit and everything's going so well. But when you actually look at the reality of it in the bear, it's a totally different story. Just because, chances are everything goes up into the right during the bull market. During the bear is the best test. Can you retain your users? Can you retain that engagement? Can you retain liquidity if you're a DeFi protocol? It's the best test to see if your product or service actually works to the best of its ability. And we've seen that, right? Where, every cycle we lose companies just because potentially they get caught up in their own hype. They spend so much money. And in reality, the only reason their product was popular is just because, it was riding the wave like hundreds of other ones were. And, in the bear market, it all just falls apart because they've not thought through potentially their tokenomics. They've not thought through how they're going to retain the users. It's not a sticky product. And it just becomes another one of those products which people used once, but never again.
Well, this is something I'm really curious to dive into a little more deeply, actually. So if you look at a traditional business, outside the scope of crypto, they often say that the real test of a business is it successful during a recession? And I'll use the recruitment industry as an example because that's where I've been for most of my life. But that's especially, your recruitment tends to be a very cyclical industry. In crypto even more so, but even in other industries, it's the last thing that comes back when the market comes back, and it's the first thing that disappears when the market goes away. And almost anyone can be marginally successful running a recruitment business when times are good. The real test is what happens when times are bad. And I know in other industries I've worked in, it's common that in any protracted recession, 80-90% of recruiters in that space will disappear and leave the industry and never come back. It's a bloodbath. But the thing is, in that scenario, there is a way of building a company good enough There's a way of building a company well enough and operating it well enough that it will still thrive even during a recession. It's a small minority that manage to, but it is possible. But my question then is, with crypto, does the same principle apply in the same way, or is this the way that the cycles work? Is it simply a fact that some types of crypto business, which remain important, can only succeed during a bull cycle, and the bear cycle just has to be about surviving until they can capitalize on the next bull cycle? Can it be successful in both? Is that always the case?
I think there's a load of factors that go into this, whether it's the state of fundraising of a company. Obviously, that really massively impacts their sort of life cycle. Again, how they've allocated that funding. And I guess, in crypto, you hear it's sort of a meme now, but like build through the bear market and then you spent it wisely and you're still in the game and you can come out the other side into the bull market and actually flourish. It's a tough one. Quite honestly, I think with a load of these companies now, the more mature ones have sort of managed to get to the point where I think, by and large, they know how to get through both parts of the market. And I think, as you said just now, part of the game is survival, right? Because crypto is such a volatile industry, you don't necessarily know which direction it's going to go into, which direction it's going next, particularly when it comes to like black swans and that sort of thing. So again, looking at founders and how they sort of manage these risks, I think it's just really important to always think about, okay, yeah, I mean, firstly, what is roadmap? What is going to be your risk management? But also thinking through how are you going to weather 2 years of reduced engagement, usage, whatever it may be. But I mean, at the same time, that's an opportunity to look at new opportunities to innovate, to create new products, and actually find something that does have that product market fit, which makes your product sticky, which means throughout the cycle your product's going to be used. Quite honestly, I think given the state of the market, it's tough right now during a bear market to sort of retain the same level of usage. It's basically a function of like liquidity, right? And during a bear market, most of the time that liquidity is, particularly you look at stable coin liquidity as like an indicator for this, you see that massively reduce, and that has an impact across the entire ecosystem. Sure, I think you could probably build companies around crypto, like adjacent to crypto, which are pretty successful throughout, bull, bear markets, whatever it may be. But I think right now the challenge is for those ones which are on chain, just because it's basically a function of liquidity. And ultimately, what a bear market is a load of money exiting and a load of that liquidity leaving. So I think, give it 5 years, we'll see what the state of play is there. I think we'll be in a much more positive position where these cycles won't be as significant and as impactful on potentially on-chain companies as well. But hey, I don't want to make any predictions because, as with crypto, everything's a bit of a guess still.
I actually think that's a really impactful insight, because what it tells me is that the volatility of the cycle needs to be planned in from the very beginning. And a lot of, in more traditional industries, people can get away with running their businesses on a knife edge. Hey, we've got enough cash to last us the next 6 months. Let's keep, and they can survive like that for years. But in crypto, you need to be thinking about, we need to make enough money for this 2 years to carry us through the following 2 years and beyond. A bit like people that work in the tourism industry. If they were to spend all their money in the summer, they'd be on the streets because they're not going to make any money in the winter. I think it's a similar concept.
Yeah, and I think it's forcing founders to really think more about revenue than they have done before in the space, particularly as markets become more competitive and as they mature. Companies really need to be aware as to bottom line, where we're going to be generating our revenue, how we're going to capture market share, and more importantly, how we're going to retain it. I think in previous years, everyone's just ridden the wave of the hype cycle. Companies have raised silly amounts of money, but I think hopefully what we're seeing now is things come a bit more back down to earth, and hopefully sort of emulating what you see in other markets which aren't crypto per se, just because I think it's sensible for everyone and a healthy thing, right? Where valuations are more reasonable. Crypto companies are run more like businesses rather than these casinos, etc.
Tom, this has been super valuable. I'm really curious to go back and take notes on this after, but we've got a really crystal clear set of actions for each stage here. Is there anything else you wanted to add or talk about?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we've covered a few topics which are useful to founders. Yeah, quite honestly, I think the bottom line is, founders not for everyone, but fair play to anyone that gives it a go, particularly in crypto, because it's hard to be a startup founder normally, but to do it in crypto it's a different beast. So yeah, I mean, always happy to chat to founders. If ever anyone wants to reach out, more than happy to have conversations and see if there's anything I can help out with.
On that, Tom, if someone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Yeah, Tom Phipps on LinkedIn, at Robot Llama on Twitter or Telegram.
Awesome. Well, Tom, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I hope you've enjoyed it as well.
It's been brilliant. Cheers, Harrison, and hopefully catch you soon.
My pleasure. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you soon.